that's.
All right, so did you change the clock?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. All right, so like our charter commission, just drafting subcommittee meeting this morning to go through and make sure we've got our ducks in a row as far as drafting and talking through any questions that we have. Non-official decision-making meeting, just more of a work session. Make sure that we're all comfortable with what we're doing. All right. So then we have a copy of the last memo that we had talked about the legislation. Got
Well, just to start, I started with road for, after I read everything, because it's very linear and it contains things spelled out specifically that New Albany has to run, but the other ones don't have. So I don't know if that would be helpful for anybody to follow that.
Which one?
For road report.
Are we on our,
Or-
for them?
Yeah. And his memo seems to kind of follow it, so. Starting with his memo, I guess. Just gets meatier, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yes, it does. And I think somebody had requested, because it is a lot to go through, would it behoove us to have subcommittees like this to deal with drafting or looking at the different memorandums and just helping kind of condense it. It'll go through, so that our Thursday meetings, it's not,
I think that's a good idea, but in essence, people who aren't gonna read it aren't gonna read it. Whether we condense it or not. I mean, we could condense it into 4 bullet points, and people are still gonna show up and want to read the whole thing. I'm 100% sure, knowing the people who sit around this table. And I'm not pointing fingers or anything, myself included. Like,
Nor is that necessarily bad, it's just
Right.
people's process, right?
yeah.
okay. Is it worth, and maybe it's too early to answer this question, is it worth it just to go through and highlighting that this is what's boilerplate?
Yeah,
That would at least cut out some.
that's kind of why I use road report. In my mind, it's like, this is kind of like, you know, so I can take it out kind of easily.
All right, so how do we,
Well, let's just read question 1.
do it? All right, so. Before question 1, just the paragraph above that underlined, it said, one of the underlying issues that repeatedly appears for Article 4 is which procedural elements should be left to council's discretion and which should be permanently stated in the charter. So, in other words, watch out for that. I think it's the same thing that Rob said, don't overdo, on the other hand, don't leave it so general, we're in the same thing.
Yeah.
In some ways, I think what we'll be, because we talked about this a little bit on Thursday with a couple of aspects of Article 2, or Article 3, I mean, it's almost looking at it in, I guess, the negative instead of, reactively instead of proactively. It's what do you want to make sure council has to do as opposed to the other way around, as opposed to the freedoms that they have, right? Like, you can give council a bunch of freedom and that's awesome, but there are certain things that we might want to make sure they have to do a certain way, and then we don't want to give them that freedom. Because otherwise, a bad council 50 years from now might say, cool, new rule of council is everything is an emergency vote, no three
Right.
three readings ever again.
Right,
Done.
like we don't like that, let's just let everything.
Yeah.
For example, in the form of action by council, where it says road reports is very general, and Romney and Dublin are more specific. In this case, I kind of prefer the specific. I think that,
Also, if Grove Boards is really general, there's a lot of meat to Grove Boards for being really general.
so, I would think that giving specific guidance wouldn't be harmful. I looked at our council rules, which is beautiful, but there are several things in these various charters where it says it will be determined by council that they don't even address in it, because obviously council's never dealt with some of these things. So maybe more guidance would be better than general.
I guess maybe that's really the actual heart of the first question. Instead of trying to talk about this provision or that provision or this sentence or that sentence, what is the sense of the people in this room in terms of what would work from our part? Do we want to spell out a whole bunch of very specific things that council has to follow when they're crafting their legislation? Or do we want to trust our council and leave a lot of it up to them?
So there are two things that I would like to see accomplished in this article. One is that we should identify the bits of legislation that are perennially passed as emergencies that people get their knickers in a twist about, but they don't have to be emergencies because it's not the kind of thing that is, they should just go into effect immediately. For example, police commissions, right? Council has to pass legislation to authorize a police officer's final commission, right? And it almost always passes an emergency because, you want to give that person their commission so they can get a fully fledged officer of the village as soon as possible. So, 6 weeks is too long to wait on that, and another month after that, so we should just bullet point that out. Any appointments of employees don't require 3 readings, don't require, and go into effect immediately.
And then it doesn't.
And then the word emergency never happens when we pass that legislation.
So look, I know I'm a lawyer, but I'll tell you, the word emergency bugs me.
Yeah.
It does. When I hear that council has passed something as an emergency and then I read what it is, and I'm like, this is in no way, shape, or form an emergency to any reasonable person,
Well,
And it bugs me, it does.
Well, just because you do in council, I would presume that would be the hiring and confirming of someone.
Yeah.
Could be done by motion, because it says,
We
Well-
one motion, but
resolution for a ceremony, right?
I
But that's what I'm saying, that's why I'm talking.
just,
That's why I like the form of action to say, council choose motions to determine policy and procedural matters, and at least in form of action to spell this out.
I'll give that just some step to find those kinds of things, like contracts less than $2,000. So if council is passing legislation to authorize the village to engage in a contract and it's less than some threshold, does that really need 3 readings? Does that really need a month for referendum? Or is that just the work of the village and dotting i's and crossing t's?
Well, that's why I think under the effective date of legislation,
Yeah.
that's effective immediately.
Yeah,
Those are the kind of things I think that would be spelled out.
absolutely, yeah. On the other hand, so those are things I think we need to write to move faster. And then there are other things I think we need to put a measure in that stops and forces communication, right? So any infrastructure project, right? And for example, the change of the stop sign that's going on at Ponderosa, right? That was originally a project that was going to be road striping and bollards and a change of the stop sign. And it was talked at half a dozen streets committee meetings, and people talked. We had multiple recommendations from the engineer. A decision was made. That was a good price to get the desired outcome. contracts were engaged, all of that happened in public meetings. And then the day that the workers showed up to start the striping, one neighbor said, I never heard anything about it. And the whole project ground to a halt. But, right, and got canceled. We're no longer doing that striping, and because the people who lived immediately there never showed up to a streets committee meeting, never showed up to.
They get to talk to the worker on the street and say, don't do this.
Yeah, they told the worker to stop, and then the mayor was called, and the mayor showed up and stopped the work. And it's been re-adjudicated again, and we're not doing any of that stuff, we're just moving a stop sign. It's probably not gonna fix the problems, yada, 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 but, so what I'm saying is if it's a, infrastructure project, we should require before passage of any legislation to fund that project, we should require a meeting of some kind that specifically says, this is an infrastructure project, this meeting is to talk about this. Because what will happen is streets committee talked for 6 months about that project. But when we post a streets committee meeting, it just says streets committee is meeting. We don't always say it and talking about these things. So I think that we need to force that level of communication.
Right.
And it may be that in 20 years, that will be the habit and it won't be needed anymore, but I think for now.
I'll be honest, I'm kind of with Ryan on this. I think it could be very beneficial to write into the charter, basically a rule or a set of rules increasing the level of transparency that's currently required in statute, right? So if this is the level that's required by the sunshine laws, all you have to do is post that the meeting is happening, right? And then the minutes afterwards, maybe we add to it a little bit and say, it's not just that you have to post that the meeting is happening, you have to post the agenda, kind of thing, or something like that. I don't know.
I hear you, and I agree that that would be optimal. However, agendas can change, right? Agendas can be amended on the fly, even at a council meeting that, and you can say that, somebody could say, yes, it is my agenda to talk about the things that are important to my community, and that's you, right? And while you or I don't feel like that's a full-fledged agenda,
Yeah.
unless you then say an agenda with X many header topics, and so many stuff, that you can't do that because then.
Right, you're limiting.
Right. Which is why I think we should identify the kind of items that truly require, and I won't use the word transparency because I don't think it's a transparency thing. I think it's a communication thing. I think there's a difference between transparency and communication.
A higher level of communication.
And what we need to do is force that communication.
Would that have been the kind of thing that would have fallen under, in the zoning area, you've got to, at least under Dublin and law, you have to send notice to the residents, within 200 feet, one of them says, and then another one says across the street, which basically is 200 feet. Would that be the kind of
So that's
thing
part of it.
that would go to that?
That's part of it, but if you put it in a zoning section, then it would only apply to zoning changes, right? But
Oh, no,
So-
I'm not saying just there,
Yeah,
I'm
but I'm
just
saying-
saying, could it be
Instead of
written
instead
kind
of
of
putting
like
under
the
the.
zoning notice?
yeah. Zoning, yes, that wouldn't be inappropriate, but I also just think the general notice of
Well,
anything, infrastructure, projects over 50,000 or projects over whatever number we determine.
That must be somewhere else in the charter, because I'm not going to find that yet.
So I think to your point, Shelley, it's infrastructure, zoning, those go together. Do you go with a more general chunk, all things like this have to be addressed this way, or do you address it in each thing's separate section?
So look, there's gonna be an article in the charter on zoning. Well, that'll have its own charter, and if we wanna have rules that are special to zoning and infrastructure, separate from the general way in which council operates, then yes, it would go with that. So, okay.
So that's what I'm saying, that makes sense there. Is there a general thing that makes sense to put in general area. I don't know the answer.
I really,
I think we can do a beefed up notice requirement. I really do think we can do something like that in Article 4. I'm all for, the more notice, the better, in my mind.
As we sit here.
Yeah.
And unnoticed.
So, I do, okay,
But
kind of
yeah.
digging into, so you gave two good examples of situations where there have been either problems or we would want council to have the freedom to act fast, right? There was the stop sign and then there's, we commission a police officer and we don't want them to wait literally 3 months before they get to start work.
Yeah.
It seems to me we may want to be a little bit careful about rules and legislative procedure pertaining to things like that, because we did decide to do the council, mayor, administrator form of government. So we may actually want to set aside Article 4 for the moment and go over mayor and administrator and try to dig into what we think we're gonna wanna have the powers of mayor and administrator be versus council. Because, for example, I could absolutely envision a scenario in which council has set the budget for the police department, but council does not select the next police officer. That's the job of the mayor and the administrator. You see what I'm saying? And so then in that case, it's not even a matter of, okay, we have to vote and have 3 readings and blah, 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 blah for the new police officer. It's just a hiring matter for, and same thing for the stop sign. I could see a scenario in which the way Minerva Park operates becomes council and through their subcommittee has decided X thing shall be done on this street. They send a written notice to the mayor or the administrator saying, do this thing, this is what we have voted to do, and then they do it, whether the neighbor likes it or not, and if the neighbor wants to complain, they can do so, but it's not the mayor's purview to cancel the project, because they've been instructed to do so by the council.
I agree, but that doesn't actually solve the problem that all of these people had I'm trying my best to
No, yeah.
play the other side, because really, my personal feeling is, people listening online, those people should have showed up to the meetings and explicitly, right?
They should not have been able to grind that project to a halt. I'm sorry, but that's just not how that should
I kind of disagree about that, because if I lived there and I did speak with the resident after the meeting, and I would like to process on that, I would like to have had notice, actual notice. And so.
And I agree with that.
Yes.
But that's what 6 months of streets committee meetings were about.
Right, but could it have whatever notice that we could come up with, would that have stopped that? Because once you had actual notice, then you
Which
could
is
have been
why-
stopped from
yeah.
it.
Which is why I think, again, particularly for infrastructure, a requirement to pass any legislation for infrastructure would require a specific public hearing, right? An opportunity that, a moment that obligates the council to bring this infrastructure problem specifically in front of the public, outline the details of the project, and allow for comment at that time, right? Otherwise, because, all our infrastructure projects typically have this kind of problem, right? Anytime we're spending money, we have these kinds of problems because somebody's, unless we are pleasing one exact person and only inconveniencing that one person, somebody's always going to be able to say, I didn't hear about it, unless we make it as big a headline as we can.
Right, there's gotta be a happy medium somewhere on that spectrum, because, the bottom line is, if they have to come knock on your door and sit in your living room and explain to you that a meeting is gonna happen, literally no governance would ever get done ever, right? So that's why they wrote the sunshine rules the way they did. You post it in a public place for so much time, and then that's what counts. And if you don't show up to the 6 months worth of committee meetings, you had your notice, whether you realize it or not. And I think maybe
Meetings
like,
are so important.
And so
I absolutely agree that, from the way it is now versus sitting in your living room, we can go somewhere in the middle.
And that's
But
why,
we can't say, well, no street projects are done unless we go talk to every single person in their living room. I mean, that's just not
Oh,
working.
yeah.
And that's why I think that the happy medium there is forcing the public hearing.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, well, then that brings to mind the fact that in the charters that I have read, when they're talking about notice to file and motion to section, it appears that actually the second reading of the proposed ordinance, it's usually an ordinance, is at the second meeting. And Kelly will need to do a more precise public hearing paragraph.
Well, and here's the thing though, if you look at Groveport 404, readings shall be by title only. I hate that. I don't, that's
And we
useless.
I don't
And
want that.
that's in our council rules.
It is, and I've never cared for that.
I don't mind that as long as the full text of the legislation is readily available. And that would be another problem. That is another problem that we have, and
It
it should
is.
be included
Yeah.
in the charter that,
I remember doing that once when I first moved here. There was a reading by title only. I was like, oh, okay, that's something I think I'd like to read. Where is it? And I couldn't find it at the time. Now, look, I spent 10 minutes looking for it and gave up. But that's not what the average experience should be.
And so that is another part of the legislative process. So, before a reading can even happen, it should be the full
Displayed
language,
prominently or something.
readily available through, the website, through whatever.
I would agree.
That's another part of the legislative process. Now, sometimes they'll say, well, it's not all the way done, we just have, but it should just be as
Right.
much draft and.
Well, okay, like here, 4.03, this is government procedure for consideration of legislation. The legislation may be introduced by any member at a regular special meeting of council prior to the introduction. The clerk of council should distribute a copy of the legislation to each council member, city manager, and file a reasonable number of copies in the office of the clerk of council and such other places as council may designate. And then simply publish the title, but they need to have a copy of the legislation available.
Yeah.
So that people can read it.
And I think in this day,
Would that cover it?
available on the website, in my opinion, is good enough.
Brian, if you look actually at the very next section, 403, the public hearings, this could be very helpful.
For which one over?
Double. The procedure for public hearing shall be determined by the council rules of order. The public hearing of any legislation shall follow its publication by no less than 7 days, may be held separately or in conjunction with a regular or special council meeting, may be adjourned, and then just, procedural stuff, but
So,
the public hearing of a resolution shall be conducted at the time of its introduction.
but what was the first sentence?
Procedure for public hearing shall be determined by council rules of order, right? So that's a problem.
So this is the point where I agree, they can do that for every kind of legislation except infrastructure.
Okay, so that,
If it is roads, sewers, water delivery, the pool, facilities, those need a public hearing.
so we came back to Kelly just for that one sentence, we would have to, I would think, somehow embody, our procedure for public hearings
Yeah.
in the charter.
I give you another example where this wasn't required and so it didn't happen. And that was the 2999 Double Granville Road building, right? I will gladly argue that that was a transparent project because everything happened in a public meeting. But because the council at the time, which I was a part of, was waiting to have the deal ready and done and it was a pretty bow on it to have a public hearing, right? And the public hearing happened and legislation was passed and then pitchforks came out. So,
I was holding the pitchfork.
yeah, no, and I don't hate on you for it because, it is what it is. But, right, that was a situation that certainly could have been avoided if a public hearing was mandated.
or more than one for that matter, for a super, like,
A huge.
cosmically speaking, that building isn't a giant building or a giant purchase, but for Minerva Park, that would have been a really big move. That could have done more than one public hearing, that would have been awesome.
Absolutely, but at least requiring one
Yeah.
is light years ahead of the game in forcing communication. Because again, I think I've said it a couple times, I don't think that transparency is a problem because we are in accordance with sunshine laws, it is a communication problem. If you are not obligated to communicate,
Then you won't.
then in many instances, you will only communicate as much as is convenient to you or as much as you feel will get you your desired end goal.
So it sounds like, to me, everyone's in agreement that some communication should be required. Where we differ is the level
Yeah.
I
Saying that-
don't necessarily disagree on the level.
Okay.
I mean, I was going through pitchfork, so.
Okay.
And in our rules of council, I have to say, I don't find any rules for public hearings.
Right.
So, I think, yes.
Yeah, is that the answer? Do we require somewhere in this charter that council rules? I guess this would be back in Article 3. Should we maybe think about an addendum to Article 3 requiring the rules of council to include provisions for public hearings?
I think just like,
I don't
I
know.
would,
Or do we want to leave that up to council?
I think that once it's in the charter, then they have to get.
Yeah,
into the
agree, but
charter.
I would not put it in the council section, I would put
It'd
it
be
in
in this-
legislation.
This article.
And I would put it at, I would set certain triggers. Is it infrastructure, right? So are you doing anything to the roads? Are you doing anything to the sewers? Are you doing anything to the water lines? Are you doing anything to the pool? Are you doing anything to facilities?
I get, so that's where you're kind of not gonna lie, Brian, that's where you kind of lose, in terms of like the level of communication, I'm right there with you. Where you're kind of losing me is, why are we differentiating between some types of legislation and other types? Like, I get it, if we pass a resolution saying that the ducks are awesome, maybe we don't need a public hearing for that, I get it.
Okay,
But,
Those are not awesome.
ducks are awesome, geese suck.
So I
yeah,
guess,
he's explicitly the worst.
so I guess what you're leaning towards the flip side, okay?
Yeah, like, why are we not just saying, hey, this is a general rule?
Because for the other side, because if you make it a general rule, then when we are passing legislation that is less, so I think those are our biggest dollar items, right? So this definitely focuses on our biggest dollar items.
Could we put a dollar threshold instead of?
Certainly could.
We could, but then, so it was only $17,000 that we were spending at Ponderosa, then that may not be our threshold, which is why I want.
I actually like that idea, because then it's not based on type, it's based on amount. So, right, so what if it's not an infrastructure thing, but it's, for some reason, I don't know, council decides they want to spend 20 grand on a billboard on Cleveland Avenue. That's not necessarily going to fall under your infrastructure, but it's still $20,000 for a kind of dumb idea. Maybe there should be a public hearing about that.
Okay, I'm okay with both. But again, I want to make sure that infrastructure always gets.
And I'm okay with both, but I feel like we just, either I missed it because I'm sleepy or we just jumped right over it, but what sorts of things wouldn't require?
So things that would, if we are just talking the infrastructure like I'm saying, I'm gonna think back through things that we've done recently. So.
Get out of infrastructure. What other things are there?
Yeah. So non-infrastructure was council had a, what's the word? Economic development, survey done, right? Everybody got the postcard, go online, fill out the survey. That doesn't hit infrastructure, right? So that wouldn't have been included. That was a fairly substantial outlay, I think.
I was gonna say, how much would it cost to do that?
I feel like 15 grand was the total nut on that deal, but I don't remember off the top of my head for sure. That's sort of like my sense of it, right? But
I guess, okay.
other things, so, other legislations that we pass on the regular, every year we have to pass legislation to join in with Franklin County's DUI task force. office. Every year we have to pass legislation that allow, whenever we sell a cop car, we have to pass legislation allowing them to sell a cop car. Right, I don't think that we need a public hearing to allow us to disposition a cop car. Every time if we want to change the number of officers that we have, requires legislation. I don't know that that requires a public hearing, right?
So what if we did this? What if we did a general rule that public hearings are required and then apply carve-outs to the general rule? Instead of trying to have 4 different general rules spread across the charter, because that's messy, and that's really the real reason I'm kind of taking issue with your idea. Instead of having it spread across the charter, what if we have in this article a general rule? If there's legislation, a public hearing is required, and then we do carve-outs of the public hearing may be waived by council if it is, or just, I can work on the carve-outs, but what if we did a carve-out section?
I need to hear those carve-outs.
Well, yeah.
Right, because I feel like they would either turn out to be really general or shift the power back into letting the council choose to not do it, right? So if you let people say, well, if 4 out of the 7 you agree that we don't need to have a public hearing, then we don't have a public hearing, then I think you're actually in a worse place than we are today, because now it's not just that they didn't do something they weren't obligated to, now they chose to not do something. And unless you have people who are.
So off the top of my head, I could envision it being, the general rule is that there will be a public hearing for all legislation. Subsection A, council may waive this requirement if the legislation does not involve any outlay of money. Subsection B, council may waive this requirement if the legislation does not affect infrastructure. Subsection C, council may waive this requirement if it is just a council resolution, like a ducks are awesome thing.
Motion or
A motion or resolution.
Yeah.
Fine, done.
I mean, how do you feel
I-
about that? Does that make sense kind of logically?
No, you said any money, but I mean, would there be a
Yeah.
threshold?
Well, I was making up off the top of my head.
Yeah, I would say we set a threshold.
Well, here's the thing though, about to your point on that, moving a stop sign probably costs what, $500?
Yeah.
Right, so if we set the threshold at say $5,000, that doesn't solve the stop sign
But
issue.
that's why it has to be, the infrastructure has to be.
A carve-out.
Yeah, it has to be, you cannot.
But would there ever be an infrastructure project where we wouldn't need to have a public hearing? Like replacing the
people got
sign that was
their-
already there?
If people have their neighbors in a bunch over a stop sign, my suspected answer to that is no.
And most, if it's infrastructure, it's money, it's people's inconvenience, like we just had the water turned off over here for a morning because they were doing an infrastructure thing. All the people around there got a notice was, the day before, hang tag, your water's gonna be off for 4 hours tomorrow morning. I mean, I don't know, there's no resolution passed, but if that was because it wasn't a village project, it was an MI project, but it was, if that was a village who turned off my water with nothing more than, 24, 48 hours notice, I think there's questions. I think that infrastructure is an important place to require additional communication, and that's what I'm at.
And the nature of this specific village is that most of our legislation, important legislation, is going to involve the infrastructure, because we're not OBETs, we're not bringing in factories and stuff like that.
Right, yeah, and I'll say it again, I'm focusing on communication because that is our number one problem
I like the idea of having it concentrated and spread out.
Yeah.
I think that's a good idea.
I really don't want to have, a rule in the zoning article that deals with public hearings and another
Right.
slightly different rule in the infrastructure article that be like, no, let's have it all in one place.
I'm down with that, as long as we get that written in there, that is, one of my 3 biggest things I gotta make sure it's done in this.
I have, this is back to my definition of the public hearing.
Yeah, no, I agree with that also.
Because there are things that they're going to take up by ordinance, that it should be fine. That the second reading could be, you presented.
Yeah, if they're down there.
What was
I would say that if there's no one down there, I'd have them call B&B. Someone here asked about temporary license plates. We're a police station.
Okay.
Police have answers to questions.
Sometimes. I'm very funny.
Yeah, but you must never go there, Cindy.
No, I've been there.
Is it not bad? It's not bad.
No, it's.
The last time I went there was like 3-4 years ago, it was awful.
Oh, no, it's.
I go to the one over on Hayden Road and you're being out in 30 seconds.
No, the one on Marsh Road is fine.
I just spent 2 hours there renewing my license, but that was me.
But you're a serial offender.
So they never accept those, and I got one of the new compliant licenses.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's just temporary.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
You gotta bring like birth certificate, security card, 2 forms
one
of ID.
single.
Yeah. But they are,
Swear allegiance to the Republican Party.
Yeah, because now you're clear.
Oh, wow.
and it's got your picture, like 3 places on there, your signature, a whole bunch of places.
Just to prove the advantage.
Yeah.
I see today when our thumbprints are on there, people, so that they can compare the thumbprint there.
I have a
Most
passport.
of us are in
not
the system
much.
anyway, so.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Don't be doing anything else.
Right.
anyway, back to my point.
So it's a defined public hearing?
Yes, because in my mind, there are 2 kinds of public hearing. You've got some general legislation or that is, a resolution, we're going to welcome Officer XYZ. But then there are the big things that require a big Hawthorne style public
Well, that's
hearing. What is it you're envisioning in public hearings, and do we have to define it separately?
So for this purpose, I believe I would define public hearing as a separate meeting with with the express purpose to discuss a specific legislation and providing the opportunity for citizens to comment. That's how I would define it.
And council is obviously required to attend.
Yeah, a quorum of council is required to attend.
And because here's the thing, none of these samples define
See,
what a
that's-
public hearing is.
Exactly, and I haven't found.
It's just that they have to have one, so I guess, so in any of these municipalities, so then what Shelley's getting at is, council in these municipalities could absolutely pass just in their council rules, a public hearing means that at least one council member is in the building for half an hour.
Right.
And can sit there and ignore everything around them and then go home, and that's your public hearing. Like, they could theoretically do that, it would be real crappy, but they could do it.
I haven't looked at any of the council rules in these municipalities that are
I hate
vague and
it,
open.
but I'm trying to look for worst case scenario.
Again, but I don't feel like we should be legislating for those sorts of scenarios, because you'll get a situation where, like with the building purchase, right? Someone will circulate a ballot petition, put it on the ballot, and then, the council will get shaken up and we'll get a whole new council. Like, I feel like there are already strictures in place to deal with that sort of extreme situation. And that is an extreme situation, right?
It is, and here's the thing though, for every one purchase a building project, there might be 20 smaller, medium-sized projects that are handled in a crappy way, but don't individually rise to the level of referendum.
Yeah.
And that's not a way for a municipality to operate in the long term. So that's kind of why I do want to dig into this a little bit and say, hey, if we can cut some of these situations off in the past, that might be a good thing.
And to go back to the stop sign example, the legislation was passed in like late summer. And then, but because it was too late for the road work to happen, it was getting cold, you can't hang roads when it's too cold. And the road work didn't happen until the next spring. And that's when those people decided they only just heard about it, so it was too late to referendum, right? You only got 30 days. So referendum can be too late in some infrastructure projects, right?
Well, so I had not heard that at all. I didn't know any of that happened until this morning. I want,
In the case of, oh, I'm sorry, in the case of the stop sign, it still stopped the project, like one concerned citizen stopped that project cold, in your example. So,
Yeah, it's really
That-
because.
I mean, that's not good.
And
Yes, that's how it happened.
Yeah.
well, and that's the thing, like, I'm really glad that you told that, because like I said, I didn't know that had happened until just now. I want to remember that when we're in the general meeting discussing mayor and administrator, because in my mind, just like I want the mayor to have powers to check council, in what world should it be okay for the mayor to unilaterally decide to not enforce a council legislation, right? The mayor should not have been able to do that.
There's also a whole council who wasn't invested in that project, right?
Fine.
So they were like, okay.
So if they ratified it after the fact, that's council's business, but in my mind, if council passes a law that is lawful, saying this shall happen and the mayor shall do it, then the mayor doesn't get to say, nah. I think that's not okay.
All right, so circling back to the gist of what we've talked about, we all agree that we love the idea of a requirement of public hearing specified in the legislative procedures section with carve-outs for exceptions as compared to trying to put it in all different sections. And so that's, this is that conversation, and the carve-outs and the details of that obviously have to be discussed in the meeting, but that's
And I'll take a crack at
kind of
that language. So what I'm kind of hearing is,
what we already have.
right, what I'm kind of hearing is that in the general sense, we're leaning towards the more specific instead of the more general kind of boilerplate stuff, right? Is that what everybody's kind of leaning?
I am accepting some pretty boilerplate.
Right, well, and that's what I'm gonna end up doing is kind of going through and doing the reasonable person standard of, does this make sense from an order, does this not? And then obviously the general group will tweak from there. So in terms of answering number one, lean towards more specific.
I personally don't see why we can't adopt the form of action and form of legislation.
You think those are boilerplates?
I think they're boilerplate. I mean, New Albany government, I like those. If someone prefers a more general growth law, I'm sure that's questionable.
I'll be honest, like, I'm looking at New Albany's sign, I really like it.
I do.
I'm kind of planning to copy paste that and maybe only tweak it slightly if at all.
And then you think of 602, the form of legislation, that seems to be kind of.
Yeah, I don't know if we need to dictate to council too much
Other
the
than
form
that,
of legislation.
only
Well,
one
they do seem
subject.
boilerplate, like, all, they all say one subject.
This may be really
Title.
dumb and pedantic, and I really, really like internal consistency. If council is going to adopt a form of legislation, this is how our laws shall be written. I really want that to be the way it's always done then. Like, I don't want one form of legislation for zoning laws and another way of writing them for infrastructure laws and another way of writing them for appropriations. Like, I want one way of, I want a citizen to be able to open the ordinances and only have to decipher it once.
These are top line.
Yeah, so like,
So I think that,
if that's handled fine.
doesn't that, what I believe they're talking about there, in my understanding of that is that they're talking about, so like, the form of the legislation as it's written. So today, we always start with a whereas this is
Yeah.
our need, whereas this is another problem, whereas this is, you know, therefore, this is the thing that we're putting forward. I don't know that there are other options. I've only ever seen municipal ordinances done that way. So,
Yeah,
Well, I'm sorry I'm interrupting so much.
No.
This is the section of our rules of council that pertains to ordinances and resolutions. Each ordinance and resolution shall be read by title only, provided the council may require any reading to be in full by a majority vote of its members. Each ordinance or resolution shall be read on 3 different days, provided the council may dispense with this rule by a vote of at least 3/4 of its members, which would be 5.
I'm sorry, Shelley, where are you?
She's in rules of.
I'm in rules of council.
Oh, gosh, okay.
So what I'm saying is, our rules of council presently don't have a lot of,
And I want to fix that.
right,
So it's,
and so I think if you put it into the charter, then
Yeah.
they will put it
So-
in.
the.
Give me an example of what you envision, like.
In regards to what specifically?
So I think Kelly, let me ask you another question, sorry. So I think to satisfy what you were saying is you want it consistent, so merely a statement that says that legislative form should be consistent across all.
Yes, I would like to add
Yeah, and that's fine.
literally
I
a
don't think
one
anybody's-
sentence thing to that effect, kind of at the end of the
I don't
paragraph.
think anybody's disagreeing.
Yeah.
No, I think that's.
Right, I think that, if the, municipal law world comes up with a fine new way of writing municipal ordinances, that council should have the opportunity to adopt whatever it is, if instead of whereas, it's, because you see it this way,
Or
whatever it is, or, I guess you suck, whatever it is,
Okay,
they should have the ability to change,
all
but
right.
it should just be consistent throughout. Now, Shelley did open the door to, because I think the next big thing that we should address in this legislative process is, procedurally readings.
So that's number, let's go, if we're going in order, that's number 2 in the memo.
Okay.
So,
So wait, let's go back
Digging
to
into
requirements,
three
all legislation,
oh, sorry.
word, legislation in uniform, where would that fit in?
That'll go in, form of legislation. So for example, looking at New Albany, they have a section 6.02. I would literally throw an extra sentence at the end of that paragraph saying this shall be consistent across all types of legislative action.
Okay.
Number 2. So this is literally just asking the question, are we sticking with 3 readings? Do we want 1 reading? Do we want 15 readings? Paul is saying we need to decide what we're doing there. And he's saying, he's saying in the memo that 3 is standard, like both in and out of charter municipalities.
City council does.
3 is standard, I do not think we should deviate from that.
I don't either.
I think that we should consider raising the bar for waiving readings. And
Yeah,
I think
so-
that we should consider waiving the bar for, emergency.
Right, so digging into number 2, if you look at, A, B, C, and D, what it's getting at is, so look, once you have selected the number, what you're really digging into is 2 things. One is suspending the readings as an emergency, and then 2 is how many council members does it take to waive? So those are really the 2 things we need.
So,
If everybody's like, yeah, let's do 3 makes sense, that's the easy part.
Yeah.
Now we need to decide,
We don't have to make that decision, but we're not gonna.
yeah, we're leaning in that direction in terms of drafting, and I'll propose it at the general meeting. But that's the easy part. The hard part is, what does it take to suspend the 3 reading rule? And how many members of council does it take to do that?
right, so currently, it takes 5 of 6 to waive readings. Right, if we are proposing a 7-member body, right, I think it should go up by 1. I think we should require 6 of 7.
I agree.
For what it's worth, if you look at letter C, Paul has kind of added some commentary in here, it's just a little hidden. Because 6 votes is just shy of requiring a unanimous vote, we recommend that the commission consider setting this requirement at 5 votes.
3/4.
Yeah. For a 7-member, sorry, let me read the whole, not the whole thing, but the relevant thing. For a 7-member council such as Minerva Parks, a 3/4 vote, 7 times 0.075 equals 5.25, would be equal to 6 affirmative votes, which would allow for only 1 absence or dissenting vote. Because 6 votes is just shy of requiring a unanimous vote, we recommend the commission consider setting this requirement at 5 votes.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Well, I'm not gonna lie, we're here, I wanna dig into this. What are the upsides and the downsides to having it set up such that 5 members of council can say, we need this sooner, we're gonna call this an emergency and waive the 3 readings rule? What are the upsides and what are the downsides?
So it's
Remember,
not
it's waiving an emergency.
Sorry, what are the upsides and the downsides to waive it, allowing 5 members of the 7 to waive the 3 readings rule?
So the upside would be that you are moving legislation faster, right? So a 3 reading process in our current setup is at least 6 weeks, right? From reading 1 to reading 3, that's 6 weeks. So if you need something to move faster than 6 weeks, you need to waive readings.
For example, appropriations for transmission.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
The downside is that you lose the opportunity for people to come and hear said readings, right? To have time to gain awareness of said readings, right? So if you're a person who only looks at council meeting minutes or council work session packets once a month, and they only read it once, you may very well miss it, right? So,
Yeah.
so that is the downside of waiving readings, is that you lose, and again, I won't say transparency, but you lose 2 points of communication. Right now, in 5 years of watching our council, I believe I have only seen 1 time where, no, I've seen 2 times where there was any dissent on waiving readings. And 1 time it was 1 dissenter, and the other time it couldn't get done. So there was enough of a log jam that we couldn't get the 5. Right, so those are experiential things. Now I'll give you one other point that I think is important here, is that whatever that number is, like you said, it doesn't allow for absences. So if you have 2 people who can't show up to council that night, and you absolutely have a real serious thing that you want to get through, you're stuck. So if you have 2 vacancies on council with a 7-member body and you require 6.
I mean, we did just approve the drafting in Article 3 of a section allowing for special meetings, right? So if you have a regular meeting, only 4 people show up or only 5 people show up, and there's a big deal issue. We don't have enough votes to waive the 3 meeting rule. We don't have, we can't get this done, but it needs done.
Sure.
There's still gonna be enough people to call a special session a day or 2 later.
There's always a application or whatever.
Right.
Spoken like a true attorney.
No, absolutely.
Love it.
That's what I did. And I can give you an example where exactly that was done, right? When council that I was on tried to repeal the legislation being referendum and pass a new one, we couldn't get 5 people to vote to waive readings on that new legislation. So we had 3 meetings on 3, I don't recall if they were consecutive days or 3 meetings within a week, because we had 4 people who would show up and sit and listen to readings. So we didn't waive readings, we had all 3, and then voted on it. So, as a strategy, it exists. It may not always, it may not always be what you want, but as a strategy.
Well,
it
in
exists.
favor of the number of points of feedback we got related to communication, I think we're called to err on that side.
Oh, yeah.
Because people are pissed. It's like, come on.
So look, I guess between the 2 of them, despite my personal hatred of the word emergency, I am more okay with passing legislation that takes immediate effect. I'm okay with that. The more we're talking this morning, I'm really kind of not okay with waiving the 3 readings rule in general. Like, I get that there are things that need done quickly, but I really don't like
I think that,
waiving that, I just feel like it should be an actual emergency situation in order to waive that 3 readings.
I think that there are times where both are useful and necessary, right? So, one of the, there are always things that come up that have a time period that makes it such that 3 readings is onerous, right? And is it really worth the council person's time because, we didn't have the vendor contract for the vending machines at the pool. We don't have their contract ready, but it needs to be signed by a certain date so that they'll have them in there for pool opening. And we really need our council people to come in 3 times in the week preceding pool opening to make sure that that reading gets done.
But is that really an emergency?
But it's a service that we're providing and there should be those things. Is it really worth, that level of onerousness to get that done? So I believe there needs to be an option to waive readings. I believe in a high bar, right? I'm saying it needs to be available, but I have no problem with it being not unanimous, right? That's why I.
So I want to hear what
Yeah.
everybody else is thinking, but I'll be honest, I think it should either be 6 or 7.
Yeah.
Where I'm currently sitting after the last 5 minutes, I'm leaning towards 6 or 7.
Well, but we're not making decisions.
We're not-
Yeah, that's why it's a meeting.
Right, but I mean, that seems like something that is gonna
My
have to happen.
Talking
personal
about what
opinion.
we drafted and presented
Yeah.
to the group as a agenda.
I know from watching how the council meetings online, that they're not doing it as much, I think.
It has been less. The current council has definitely.
And what I can see, there have been reasons to do that. But I guess I agree with you. I mean, I don't want to inhibit the moving forward of routine things. On the other hand, the idea of buying 2 more $40,000 cruisers,
Yeah, I don't want that way.
yeah, right.
What do some other people think?
Well, your example seemed ridiculous to me. It's not an emergency.
Yeah,
It almost seems like we call it an emergency, but I think it's the definition of
Well, I don't
emergency
think
and
it was called an emergency.
No, because that's what it is.
he's applying urgency to a scenario in which I don't think there's real urgency, right?
We'll live without it.
The pool can operate without vending machines.
But let me flip that around for you. If it goes through those 3 readings, are you going as a citizen? What difference does it make? Are you going to do anything different if it takes 6 weeks or 6 days? What's the point? What are you trying to accomplish?
As a rebuttal to that question, I'm gonna say, isn't part of the reason that we're all sitting in this room, the general dissatisfaction within Minerva Park
Yes.
of people going, wait a minute, why are we doing so many things without any readings and without public hearings? And I don't understand what council's doing, I don't understand what mayor's doing, maybe we need to change. That's the reason we're all here.
Right.
So I'll throw out an opinion, and I think that a lot of that is less procedural based and more communication based. So something that, again, throwing in there a stopping point that would require some additional specific communication before waiving of readings would not be inappropriate. So a statement saying, in the note, because typically if you look at the agendas and when you look at the legislative part, the council will know in advance that they are intending to waive readings, intending to pass as an emergency. So if that's already the intent,
There should be some kind of
there
public
should
statement.
be a communication. There should be an additional communication that says, hi, this is something unusual, and come look at me. That would be, and with that kind of special communication, I would even be okay with 5 votes. Because then you have put a spotlight on it and said, if you're a person who's gonna care, now's the time to care.
That's a good compromise. And it doesn't exist now, right?
No.
So it's an innovation.
Correct. Council today could, the day of their meeting, amend their agenda to add legislation on, waive the 3 readings, and pass as an emergency, and in the span of less
And
than
that's happened.
3 hours, have a law that could not be referendum on the books.
Although when we do this, we're going to put in the blurb that says all legislation is subject to referendum and blah,
Well,
blah, blah.
but I think
I
there
think
are.
it was a
emergency-
time, he was referring to the timing aspect of it. It was too
Yeah.
late to do a referendum.
Oh,
Well,
yeah,
well, yeah, that was in the case of the stop sign, that was, they didn't
yeah.
raise their apples until after the 30 days expired.
So that compromise makes sense, but I'm worried that it's a little complicated. Is that really a better solution than just requiring 6 votes? If something is a matter of, actually a matter of temporal urgency, then 6 people are presumably gonna agree that it is that urgent.
I agree. I was just throwing out another idea. And, my problem with saying, additional, special communication is required, I think that we have to define what that special
Yeah, it's
communication
just,
is.
that sounds a little complicated.
Somebody could say, look, we said we're planning on waiving 3 meetings right here, right? And so if it's on the agenda, the only case that special communication was carved out is that changing of the agenda of the meeting, like that most egregious of bypassing communication and due process. But, if they.
Anybody else have any ideas? I don't think we need any other ideas. We get here an hour and 15 minutes and we've gone through 2 provisions.
I think we're.
I get it. I get it.
I think we're-
Here's the thing though, I agree with you, and yet, next to choosing whether we're having a mayor or not, this may be one of the more important things that the charter commission
I
decides.
understand the import, but I feel like everyone's sort of agreeing, and I mean,
Yeah.
had any problem, they would raise them at this point. Like, we're all here in this room hearing what you're saying.
So if I were to draft something that basically says 6, waiving the 3 reading forward would require 6 votes, would it be a good idea for me to draft that and bring it to the regular meeting?
Yeah, I feel like we're gonna discuss this at the regular meeting. This is.
Oh, we will have conversation.
That they'll.
I think that's, but if this group has said 6 votes, I'm not gonna bring up other ideas, that's what I'm.
Yeah, I'm with Brian on that.
The,
So what about the emergency?
I think emergency should be 6 as well.
Yeah.
For all the same reasons, that there are
Yeah.
times when you don't need, that you need that to go forward. I also think that, as I mentioned before, there should be carve-outs for some kinds of legislation that just go into immediate effect, like officer commissions.
We may, again, I'm gonna come back to my point, we may be able to kick that can down the road a little bit until we can, and see what the charter commission and general meeting ends up doing in terms of separation of duties between executive and legislative. Because I could envision it being appropriate, if we're going to have that kind of personnel, a mayor and an administrator, why not let the council set the budget for the police, and then the mayor and the administrator are in charge of hiring and firing?
I
I think
would,
that makes a lot of sense.
it does. I feel like there may be a state requirement for council to.
For commissioning of an officer,
For commissioning of the officer.
that's something to look into.
Yeah, so that might be a question for Paul if
Yeah.
someone wants to.
Yeah, I can write that down.
Yeah, that's really.
By the way, what did we decide, Sunday, so
Tonight.
tonight is the deadline for people to email me questions, and I'll email him tomorrow morning. Okay.
And do you have the questions from our last meeting
They're
already?
written down, I haven't typed them on.
In other words, you don't need us to resend that to you.
What's that?
In other words, you don't need us to resend that to you.
I don't
Okay.
think so. Rainey, if you have time, if you could summarize what you believe the questions to be, so that I can double check mine and make sure I didn't miss something.
You send me your draft.
Or actually, yeah, if we have,
Draft for the minutes.
yeah,
Well, the minutes aren't specific, I mean, they were, let's see.
But
I
it
mean,
might-
if I would be digging through them just like I would be through my own notes, then.
It might help draw.
I'll look at the
Yeah, I just want to make sure that I haven't missed something important, because I was kind of all over the place in terms of handwriting notes. Because there were 2 things at once.
And moving on to the next section of that, Paul notes that
Are you in?
I've gone back to Paul's memo and 3 B says, what happens to emergency legislation that receives more majority yes vote? And it says both New Albany and Dublin provide that legislation still goes into effect, but not as an emergency. I like that.
Rather than the
Right, yeah.
entire thing failing.
Right.
I think that's the differentiation they're making. It's, so there would be two votes, one to pass the legislation, the other to pass it as an emergency.
Is it two votes or is it one vote, that you propose it as an emergency and it passes as an emergency?
Well, we should
You have
probably
six
specify
votes.
So it's it proposes emergency, it receives a majority, but not a super majority required to pass an emergency. So in other words, it gets, if you require 6, it gets 5.
I see.
Yeah, and 5 it passes, but it has 30-day waiting period.
And we would want to specify that such that the entire thing doesn't just fail.
Yeah.
Is everyone kind of leaning in that direction, being okay with that?
Yeah. So just to go back sentence.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I'm gonna just circle New Albany and Dublin and all. Sure, you the well-written language.
So, and just to pause there, because we're not making any decisions,
Right.
keep hashing that one out. So for the meeting Thursday, are you envisioning having kind of, here's the draft, here's where we came from, and kind of doing a conversation of this and draft all of that one meeting?
My plan is, or at least my intention anyway, was to get through as much of these memos as humanly possible today. Spend a bunch of time drafting, over the next 2 or 3 days. And, then we're not doing one or the other, we're doing both on Thursday. We're going through the memos with everybody and have my draft up on the screen and we can kind of power through.
Before we move emergency legislation, I said one thing.
Say whatever you want, you're
Here you go.
commission member of this charter commission.
You swear?
I didn't hear. Swear. I also like the language when it's talking about emergency legislation in here somewhere.
I'm sorry, Shelley, are you in the memo?
No, I'm kind of out in the world.
Okay, carry on.
Well, I mean,
That's somewhere.
it says somewhere that, emergency ordinance shall declare it's necessary for the immediate preservation of public health or public peace, health, safety, or welfare, and shall clearly specify the nature of the emergency. So it's not
Do all of
sufficient.
6 or 4.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
yeah,
Oh, I
she's in number 4 of the memo.
Yes, under A. I think that if they're going to try to do something as an emergency, it's not enough to say, we're gonna wallpaper bathroom and we're passing it as emergency. I mean, you have to say, why is it an emergency?
Didn't we talk about having a meeting explaining?
Well, post mortem meeting.
Yes.
That's what I would love to see happen.
Yeah, that's what we did talk about on Thursday.
Right, that would be required. That is something I would love to see, right? I think that if I also think that language requiring, in the ordinance, a reconciliation or a statement of what that emergency is crucial. I also will caution in making it too specific. I also caution that when, as useless as this is, if you make it too general, anything can be an emergency, right? So current language is health, welfare, and safety of the
Public
village.
peace, public peace, health, safety, or welfare.
Okay, public, so welfare, right? I will give you the rationale that was used in the attempt to pass the purchase of 2999 Double Granville as an emergency, right? It was by the council people looking to pass that emergency legislation. It was to the welfare of the village, as based on the information we had, it was a savings of over $1 million. That is to the welfare of the village.
That's why I like to shall clearly specify the nature of the emergency.
And if we put that in the legislation, I don't think anybody would have any less mad at what we were trying to do. Right? Because I stood in front of rooms of people and said, based on the information we have, this will save us $1 million. Nobody, you know, so,
Nobody bought
well, nobody bought it,
Nobody said
nobody,
anything.
well, again, it is, yeah, so
it.
I know that there is a strong desire to strangle emergencies out of existence, but they are both necessary and onerous, and that's why I think requiring communication
I know we
is the
can't,
most important part.
I know we can't write this into the charter because you just can't. But I feel like an emergency situation should pass a duck test. It should, if it looks like a duck, then it's a duck. If it feels like an emergency, then it's an emergency. But if you're re-wallpapering the bathroom,
Sure.
that doesn't pass the duck test.
Sure.
I don't know how to write that, but that's why I like so up in arms about it.
I also feel like, emergencies are not quite as clear as ducks, right? Because, you know,
But it has a different.
a platypus could pass the duck test.
Right. All right, let me work on this and we can, I think, move on.
All right, so we're on to
Number 5,
these 4.
we were just on 4.
Yeah.
I don't want to go back to 4.
No, let's move on. Voting requirements for council should be clear.
I've been drinking coffee for the last hour and this is great.
I had like basically 2 cups of coffee and I'm still not awake. All right, voting requirements for council should be clear, number of votes versus fraction percentages. In reference to majority votes should be explicit that they mean a majority of all members of council, not just a majority of the quorum.
Yes.
In other words, not just the majority of the people who showed up that day.
And we already discussed that last Thursday. I mean, anytime we say majority, we mean majority of.
Of all the seats of council.
Right.
The entire body.
I'm gonna write it down
So-
again.
He does pose an interesting question. So does the charter define a quorum needed for council? Or should it be left to council's rules? The example he gives is if a council member is prohibited from voting on a measure due to a conflict of interest, should that member be counted towards the quorum?
How often does that happen?
In my experience, I've only done one.
Or should this issue be left to
One
council?
vote.
rules? But if you write it into the charter that you have to have 6, I don't think council should override that.
Yeah, see, that's what I was actually perplexed by him pointing this out, because we've just gone through and identified how many passed legislation, how many to
Right.
waive.
Well, he wasn't at that meeting.
So I think that it's fine for that person who is recusing themselves for conflict of interest to count towards a quorum, but you still need a majority of council to pass it, and I just think that's the nature of the beast. So if you have 7 people, so the only example I've seen of somebody abstaining due to conflict of interest was again the building purchase. John Michaels was an employee of Huntington Bank, though he had nothing to do with lending. Huntington Bank was doing our bonds. He abstained on anything related to the issuance of the bond, right? But so now we only had 5 people to vote, and if we were waiving readings, he couldn't vote on that, so we would need all 5 of the other people to waive readings, right?
I think sometimes that's just gotta be how the way it goes.
Yeah.
I also don't wanna spend a ton of time on this, because I feel like the group reached a pretty good consensus last time, on Thursday. So really what that takes us to then is, does the same rule apply to motions and resolutions?
Yes.
Yes.
I think yes, but we have to kind of say it out loud, right? So I'm gonna draft a proposal version that way. What is D getting at?
Just trying to address, I think another number.
Oh, this is just addressing, abstaining.
The effective abstaining.
All right. I feel like,
Whether it's a default yes or default no.
oh, I get it. Isn't abstain, why would we want it to default to either?
Well, it's the, I don't know, see, because that's,
For trying to anticipate every situation created by absences, absentia, and conflicts of interest, the rules to be created by council may be a better place to address some of these issues. That may be why many charters are silent on trying to specify what counts as a quorum, specifying a certain number of votes acts as a de facto quorum requirement without having to get into the specifics and trying to anticipate every situation.
And I actually disagree with that,
I,
with doing it that way, and here's why. Every January, there's gonna be a new council that gets together and makes new rules. And I don't like the idea of these kinds of things flip-flopping every other year. What if in 2020, the rule is that abstentions are a no, and then in 2021, abstentions become a yes, and then in 2022, it flips back again? Where's the consistency? There's no way for the people to understand or predict how it's gonna work. I don't like that.
I hear you. I don't think practically that's how that kind of thing goes.
I know.
I think that, I'm still trying to wrap my head around the idea. So are they saying that you could take an absence or an abstention as reducing the number of, I don't even.
So for example, if we're requiring 6 votes to approve a waiver of the readings, but for whatever reason, 2 members have recused themselves from voting entirely, then is it possible for that vote to pass, or is that vote an automatic failure? Because you can only have 5 people vote. So, and that's the question for the Charter Commission to decide.
I feel like it's something we're gonna discuss on Thursday.
Yeah, if we have to push, if we have to kick that to Thursday, then we have to.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah, in the forum discussions we've had thus far. I think that this is something.
Will the charter set any specific public meeting requirements or allow council to set all of its own rules on that front? I think we already addressed that, didn't we?
Yeah.
But we did too.
Yeah, we covered.
What standards should apply to zoning legislation? Same question, technical codes, publishing. Those are all addressed in this section.
So,
I'll tell you what, I have no strong opinions on the zoning, and I think we should just leave those as they are. I don't think we have any specifically zoning issues to attend to. And I think our planning and zoning commission has been doing a better job for the last handful of years.
and there's a lot of material in the growth report over zoning. And I gotta be honest to say, I'm not real clear on why it's here and not in a zoning article.
Because it's just, this
Because-
is legislation, so it's legislation and zoning.
Because your legislative body passes the zoning legislation.
This is what the legislation needs to meet. So, back to the, are you breaking out across different sections, or you putting all the legislation stuff? in
It
one?
seems like,
Putting it all in one.
yeah, I guess.
And that, for the purposes of our meetings,
I hate
I
to
like
say it,
putting it all in one, but we just keep that, so we're talking about zoning.
I think
Go back and add it.
we gotta kick zoning to Thursday. I'm not trying to be a jerk. Hannah's not here. And
Yeah.
Hannah's the one that knows everything there is to know about zoning. I don't have any strong opinions.
I want to kick it further, I want to kick it to more talk about zoning. I
I agree.
think that Article 4 is probably going to be not completely done, so we've talked about all those things that circle back and have the word.
No, I
Yeah.
agree, but.
I'm gonna
yeah, we-
Trying to point something out really quickly. All of these communities are going to have much bigger zoning issues than we're going to have because they have probably 400 to 100 times what we have in the way of industrial and retail complex. Our industrial, we have 0 industrial complex and we have very, very limited retail complex. So I think that in some ways the zoning, ours can probably be a lot simpler.
Is the technical codes fairly boilerplate? I'm kind of
Make
getting
sure I'm trying to
excited.
look at it.
412. Yes, 412 is boilerplate. I'm gonna. Sorry, I understand. Sorry, I did not mean to discount what you were saying.
No, you're.
I think you're right, and yet I still think we should kick it.
No, I get that. I
Okay.
still think we should kick it, but I think that at the end of the day, our zoning issues are going to be much more simplistic than we think they're going to be.
We've got the Cleveland Avenue businesses, we've got MI Homes. I think it could get complicated pretty easily. If people want it to be complicated, and sometimes people do.
But I think it's, again, something that Hannah could.
Yeah, I want to hear what Pam has to say. She knows a heck of a lot more than I do, that's for sure.
So
Uh,
codification and publication are those things we want to tackle right now? Amendment, recording, authentication, all that.
notice, that's good. Notice and copies of legislation is gonna be boilerplate.
Authentication.
I think the only thing as far as here's the word codification, we should explicitly state that
Yes.
all attachments need to be included in codification. Because we have a ton of stuff in our codified ordinances that the necessary exhibits and attachments weren't transmitted.
And that's why Jeff couldn't find so much.
Yeah.
And, I don't know that we can require it going backward, but we can certainly require it going
Yeah.
forward. And if we put it here, it's,
Yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah.
I think that our,
And then the publication defined.
Okay.
it's an administrative point that you wish you didn't have to spell out, but.
No, I don't wanna derail because we've already been on this memo for so long that it just seems to me, attachments and exhibits should be clarifying, they shouldn't be the meat of legislation. If you can't understand the legislation at all without the attachment, then that legislation is poorly written.
I agree.
That's a lot.
That's a different thing. Can we put, for purposes of the drafting subcommittee and not making any official decisions, can we say that we are done with this now?
I want to go back to publication really quick though.
Okay.
Because, I mean, to the point of us all being here that you made earlier, Kelly, communication is the thing that we feel we have to
I
worry about.
appreciate that, yeah.
So, I mean, right now, you know, we call it sunshine laws, is this boilerplate or is this something that we?
I can do boilerplate plus, I can strengthen it up based on, our conversations today and then make a proposal on Thursday.
I feel like the boilerplate does not explicitly state publication to the web. And I feel like we should explicitly state publication to the web, right? That, I would go as far as to say, before any reading, some draft legislation needs to be available on the website. Yeah, whatever part about it.
Beforehand, not, beforehand and after.
Or, or you can not say whateverpark.org, because I'd love to see us get .gov someday. So, the website.
Yeah.
Publicly accessible.
Right.
That seems important to me, so when we're selling this and talking about this in the future
Yeah.
community
I
meetings,
agree.
we heard you, and we can point to some examples where we've enhanced what we've heard to make it better for the community.
The one good thing I told everybody that signed the petition was, we will do everything we can to improve communication.
We're gonna have to tell people we heard them because they don't feel heard.
Well, and a lot of stuff is, frankly, seems to me, maybe you don't have a child or a generation of it, seems really outdated, okay, so it could be ordinances and resolutions be published by posting a concise summary of each ordinance or resolution passed, and not less than 3 public places. I don't even know where.
I don't want a summary, I want the full language.
You bet.
I want access to the full language.
Access, right, so the full language should be on the website, and a summary can be on the door here and a sign at the playground,
As
because
long as they can walk in here and say, okay, we've got this, I want.
Yes.
I want my full copy. Yeah, because you can't put 4 pages on the sign of the playground because we're gonna have to open it
Likewise, I
up.
don't have to walk to the playground
Yeah.
to see it.
No, I agree. And actually, if a village update, the problem is village update comes up only once a month. But if there's anything pending, they can get in there, I think, especially when we start doing it in-house. They can't get in there, I mean, maybe we need to make a village update. Because that doesn't know that everybody's home. Think
Yeah,
about it, I mean, that's a loose
it's
idea.
I would, I don't know that
Yeah, see, I just thought about it, because up to now, it's like inconsequential, but we need a form of getting it to everybody's house.
I agree. I have
The way
to tell
to
you,
do
I
it.
am a head of the same kind of person when it comes to this stuff. I always have been, I've always been that. So if I'm coming in here as a, beast in the ointment kind of thing,
Mhm.
I am that person.
So I'm a person that works really
So
hard.
eyes on,
Yes, and so that's, I realize that's a discussion for later, but I think that I agree with Nina, I agree with it. Why have it there?
Right. And so let's, do you want to brainstorm that and come up with like a proposed thing that you can then hash out Thursday meeting, or do you just want to leave it for hashing out before you're done with it?
What I've written down is boilerplate plus, and I've circled, published. And I'm gonna, when I get to that part, I'm gonna see if I can come up with something that I think will be in keeping with the tenor of this conversation, and we'll go from there. We'll hash it out.
All right.
Yes, you know.
All right, so are we done with number 4? It is only wellness talk. Can we dive into any others, or do we call this?
How long are we supposed to go?
I'm so like.
We're scheduled till 1, but I have to leave at 11:30. I can't see.
I believe a little bit before you.
So why don't we just go until 11:30 and then,
All right.
if that's, because mayor and administrators can be awful. So if we can get at least
You gotta
some
start
stuff.
talking about it.
Yeah.
So let's high level it.
So wait, because our intention is to go through this, but let me be a devil's advocate, I know. So our plan is to do this every Sunday going forward. And
As
next-
much as
in theory,
Sunday.
next Sunday will be publicly posted, we'll have the building, and there will be more people here, hopefully, that we assume. So we want to leave the discussion for next Sunday, since we've got, I feel like going through this article forward is going to take the entire meeting on Thursday.
I see what Evan was saying. Yeah, you might be
You're
right.
right, Evan, you're right.
So if I just focus on getting everything drafted for Article 4, we spend Thursday working on that. Sunday, we hit mayor and administrator with a full group. Are we here the Thursday after that, sir? Correct. So that's a problem.
So you could draft up something, give it to us, we can hash it out, make it. I was also
And then when I come back the
thinking.
following week, right, he's good, mayor?
No. I was also considering that if we work on mayor administrator Sunday, and then without Kelly here to do like some of the edits and stuff like that on Thursday, the rest of y'all could work on like Article 5, 6.
Yes.
Yeah, on Thursday night, and then send him your notes, and then
I'll be honest, that would make me happier.
And then the following Thursday, we can work through all 3 of those articles. If that would make me a little bit happier. I think that would make him happier because he's doing a lot of our writing.
And it will be helpful if I mean, yes, I can just watch the recording, but it's helpful if I'm here kind of making edits as I go kind of thing.
So you're saying on this Thursday, the 14th, talk through section 4. Yeah.
Yes.
Next Sunday, the 17th, we'll do articles 4 and 5, which are 5 and 6, which are mayor and
Mayor and
administrator. And then Thursday, the 21st, when Kelly's not here, we'll do what? Article 7.
You would do what we're doing now, but for Article 7, because Soraya and I will not be here to physically
And then,
review my draft of the mayor and administrator.
okay, and then Sunday the 24th, we do what?
Maybe skip the 24th. We won't be back until like midnight.
I won't be here on the 24th.
So we would end up skipping the 24th.
It's fun.
The party doesn't start.
Well, I feel like, okay, some of the people with the loudest opinions aren't gonna be here, so maybe just skip it.
Well, and my only concern is that we know some people can never make Sunday.
Yeah,
How many are just unable to do Sundays? Well, I'm wondering if we need to consider a different day.
I mean, not that we're not doing a major decision, that we're just doing
Yeah.
this.
Based on the general straw poll we took on Thursday, it seems like most people could make.
Okay, all right.
And then again, people.
Sorry, I wasn't trying to like single anyone out. It was a matter of if there's never gonna be more than 8, then.
My understanding is that Jen could never make a weekend day.
Which, no, she couldn't commit to it.
Oh, yeah.
Because she didn't know what her homework assignment would be. for the-
But again, the people who can't make the draft meeting can definitely have their say in the Thursday meeting.
Absolutely, like, we're never going to make a final decision on anything on Sunday.
I don't believe that is the intention.
Yeah.
But I think this is helpful because we can consolidate it down to just one discussion instead.
Oh, yeah, this was very helpful, because I now know how I'm, more or less, what I'm boilerplating and what I need to work on for our board, so that's
Yeah.
good.
And we'll get the consensus of the rest of the group to see if this helps us feel like we're making more progress on Thursday meeting or if they feel like we.
alright. And then, so we're gonna meet next Sunday, we wanna say same time and place.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
what's that date?
the 17th.
Put it on the calendar.
We should probably, on Thursday when everybody's here, we should discuss Easter week. I don't know what day.
No,
No, I feel like-
April. so
Yeah, I know that's the
it's-
April, but the farther out we plan it, the better, because like I can tell you Easter Sunday, I will not be here.
Oh,
No, we're not
yeah.
doing Easter.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sunday. If you're available, you can come home kind of.
I mean, Easter Sunday, I'm gonna be sleeping in, so.
And you will deserve it by then.
Easter Sunday, like 23rd, what are you sleeping in, the full day?
I have a note about a tentative public meeting on April 26th.
No.
27.
No. April 6th.
April 6th.
Take out the 20.
Okay,
Okay.
that would be a problem.
6th.
And the flyers are going to be handed out on or about the 31st. Okay.
I think that's gonna work. I think by then we'll be able to show people legislative, mayor, and administrator, and that's a huge chunk. Like, we'll be able to really get good feedback, I think.
I did already confirm the church available.
Oh, so you said church.
Oh, yeah?
Did I send you an email that the 31st and available in the afternoon, but not the morning?
That's okay.
If we're
Great.
being
That tells us
on
something too.
It does.
I don't remember what I sent you emails
No,
on.
you didn't, you only sent me, I'm in the wrong calendar, I can't tell, you sent me 2 emails, one where you guys are neither one here, and then one where you're not here.
And I said the 29th or the 30th. So I'll send you another email, the 31st, I'm not available until the afternoon.
Okay.
Sorry, my life is,
Fine.
not my own some days.
All right, one more time for the sleeping room. 14th, which is this Thursday, we're going over Article 4, which we just did. The 17th, we're gonna look at Articles 5 and 6, and then the 21st.
So, I'm gonna write this down, please. 14th is Article 4, draft to be ready.
Yes.
And then, what's the date of Sunday?
17th,
It is review of memos for 5 and 6, right?
right? And then the 21st, you're not here.
So,
So
I think
we're
the
gonna review 7.
Yeah.
review memo for Article 7. What is Article 7? Do we know off the top of our heads?
Thursday, not.
Administrative departments.
Well, that's what I think it's going to be based on the other charters that I reviewed.
Yeah.
There's no guarantee that that'll be what.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Nope, it's administrative parcels.
Okay.
It'll be administrative departments, that personnel systems, boards and commissions. He may combine some of these like he did.
Yeah.
Because I don't think.
Let's just add that to the list of things to ask.
Okay.
All right,
What are the what memos are we gonna be getting from him and when?
Well, ask him, we have these numbers.
Oh, yeah, I can do that.
great. All right, so reviewing the drafts on the 14th, which is this Thursday, next Sunday reviewing 5 and 6. And then Thursday following reviewing 7, understanding that you're just have a bunch of stuff drafts.
So the 21st is review the memo on 7, and then the following Thursday is what date?
No, the 21st is a Thursday.
Oh, got it, okay, and
And
then
then the 24th is the following Sunday, and we're skipping it.
24th
We're
will
letting you
be,
do a bunch of drafting. And then the 28th, we'll review the draft for 5, 6, and 7.
who?
That means that we're gonna have to get some information to you. And I'm not sure how we're gonna do that. I won't let them figure it out.
Really, the information you're gonna get me is on just 7. I should already have what I need for 5 and 6. So what I would say is, if we wanna have just any hope of the 28th completing those things, we may wanna get people to sign off on being able to stay late or something on the 28th, like plan ahead. I can just see, because 5 and 6 are gonna take a while.
March 28th. The good news is I think that's the one I can't make, so we'll go way fast.
I wouldn't know that, you know that.
Are you kidding?
Okay.
Alright, so I know what my due dates are then.
Okay.
Okay.
So are we adjourning this?
As far as we're going right now.
Yes, as far as right now, anybody have anything else? All right, let's adjourn. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.